Hey guys, how are you today? It is March 24th, Tuesday, day 2 of my YouTube. Well, technically take 3, but so I wanted to start with, of course, my word of the day. My commitment is still the same to you as it was yesterday, as it will be for the whole week. It is to keep this fun and engaging for you, so hopefully it is. I don't know. I've gotten a couple feedbacks, a couple of my 7th graders that have logged on from last year that I taught in 4th grade, and I read the book too. They're all excited to hear the book again because it actually is a really good book. All right, so today's word of the day is accumulate. Accumulate. All right. So, sentence. Flooding caused water to accumulate in Harry's basement. Accumulate. The definition is to pile up or collect, and it is a verb. Some synonyms are acquire, add to, collect, grow, hoard, or gain. So, FYI, there's a few things you need to accumulate in your life, but there's some things you do not need to accumulate. Do not become a hoarder. It's gross. All right, here's some pictures of accumulating. Do you see all those dishes accumulating in that sink? Yes, accumulate. We do that often now more than ever because we are all using dishes every day. This girl has accumulated shoes, sneakers to be more exact. She has a big old collection. I'm a little jelly of her, but that's okay. All right. Accumulating shoes. This person has accumulated some items in their glove department. I'm not sure exactly what the point is of those. Maybe some of them, if they get stuck, they have a card game to play. I don't know. And a drink. We'll see. I don't know. They accumulated it in their glove department. But always a good thing to accumulate money. We want to accumulate money. We do not want to spend money all the time. So, hopefully you guys did the challenge yesterday. Today I give you the same challenge. Say the word accumulate 3 times today to 3 different people if you can. If not, text it to the 3 different people because I know you can do that. All right, so we need to move on with chapter 3 and 4 of A Night Divided. So I'm going to bring this over to my couch again and get the book again. A Night Divided. If you remember, the girl and her family are in trouble. They put a wire fence around their whole town, and it's splitting west and east Germany. So they are scared. It says, for us, the dark night had only begun. So, more to read today. All right. I noticed chapter 3 is super short. All right, so it didn't take long for the government to realize that they couldn't guard the fence so heavily forever. Even with the fence and armed soldiers, people were still finding ways out. If things were bad in our city before, they would only get worse now. We all knew that. Some people made runs in the dark and literally tore their way to freedom. Others tried swimming the canals where the barbed wire couldn't reach. At least one family simply ducked low to avoid gunfire and crashed their car through the fence. Nobody asked who might try leaving next, but everybody wondered. I kept waiting for Mama to tell us we were leaving too. Surely she would, any day now. But she never did. Maybe she had been a prisoner here before the fence appeared. Protests started in West Berlin. They chanted and held signs and aimed their cameras at the Grenzers, who held up mirrors to reflect the sun into the camera lenses and ruin pictures. Fritz, Mama, and I stood near the fence and looked everywhere among the protesters for Papa and Dominic, but we could never see them. Had they forgotten us already? I asked Fritz. He smiled as if I told a joke, then reached down and ruffled my hair. Papa would never forget us, Gerda. I kept staring, though every time I saw a face that almost was my father, my heart broke a little more. If he hasn't forgotten, then where is he? Fritz turned to Mama and lowered his voice so only the three of us could hear. There's talk about an apartment nearby that sits right on the border. You can enter the back of the building from the east and walk out the front doors into the west. Go straight through the fence. Mama shook her head. The government won't tolerate that for long. I don't want to be there when they come. And they did. Only a few days later, the government bricked up the lower exits at that building, thinking that would solve the problem. But then people started jumping from the upper windows, hoping the crowd below on the west side would help them catch them. Fritz was there a week later, watching from a distance when a woman threw down a mattress and all her bedding from the third floor, while our police banged on her locked apartment door. When the police got inside, she finally leapt out, but the cushions weren't enough for the hard concrete below. The morning after, Fritz showed me the newspaper that described her as a deserter and someone with a weak mind who had believed the lies from the West. I barely breathed as I read the article, but managed to say, she died trying to get free? Why don't they care? Fritz pointed to the final paragraph, which warned the rest of us not to try the same thing. They care plenty, because they want everyone to know hers won't be the only death. His warm brown eyes met mine. Even children, Gerda. Soon afterward, the police bricked over all the windows and locked up the building and every other building that stood along the border. Then they made the decision that something more permanent was needed. The fence began to be replaced with a concrete wall that was taller, thicker, and stronger. Sharp edges of broken glass were cemented into the top to prevent anyone from climbing over it, and watchtowers were built so fewer officers could guard larger areas. With one stacked block of concrete over another, our prison slowly became a fortress, and all we did was watch it happen. With each brick, my hopes faded until nothing was left. If there had ever been a chance of Dominic and my father returning, then the wall took that too. My school teacher taught us a new song that thanked our leaders for building wall to keep the facets out. I muted my glares and only mouthed the words when my teacher was looking. I couldn't bear to sing the lies. After a couple months, the West sent tanks to watch their side of the border, so Russia sent tanks to our side of the border. The soldiers stared at one another through binoculars, each trying to guess which side would fire first. They all had their fingers on the trigger. One side has to back down, or we'll have a third world war, Mama said over dinner one night. The tone in her voice sent shudders through me, but I still mumbled, if the West wins that war, Papa could come home. Fritz kicked me under the table, but it was too late. Mama looked up with eyes widened by dark memories. If the West wins again, then there'll be nothing to come back to, she said. Her eyes glazed over, and I knew she was remembering the things she had often described to us from the last war. The nightly bombings, constant hunger, and millions of death of both soldiers and civilians. Nobody wanted another war, not even if it brought the wall down. We will never be able to leave, Mama said. The sooner you both accept that, the happier you will be. I nodded back at her, but I knew I could never again be happy here, and I refused to accept my life inside a prison. Chapter 4. Mama once said the most wonderful thing about being younger is our ability to make things normal. That whatever life does to us, no matter how strange, it isn't long before insanity seems ordinary, or if upside down is the way things should be. Don't we kind of feel that way right now with us being home, homeschooling all day and not really knowing what's happening in our world today, and it's happening all over the place. That didn't make sense to me at first, but over the next 4 years after the wall went up, I saw it happen more and more. Most children barely noticed the wall any longer. They played hoops beneath the eyes of armed border guards in their watchtowers, rolled marbles in the shade of the wall, and learned to do as they were told without asking questions. I was 12 years old now, and the older I got, the more separate I felt from the other kids my age. Because I always noticed the wall, always. Over the past 4 years, I had learned to read the guards high up in the watchtowers and know when they were looking and when they had turned away. I knew when and where the guards did their patrols along the border and where they didn't often go. And more than anything, I knew that nothing happening to us was normal. The only one who really understood that was Fritz, who said it was because I had Papa's blood in me. Not a single morning had passed in the last 4 years when I didn't think of my father and the courage he would expect from me. My walk to school passed very close to the wall, or as close as we were allowed to get anyway. I usually made the walk alongside my only real friend, Anna, who was as timid and shy as I was bold and outspoken. Where I had blonde hair, round eyes, and an athletic body, Anna had darker hair, eyes that nearly disappeared when she smiled, and a thin frame that looked as if she needed to be fed. She worked very hard to stay out of trouble, which made her an ideal friend for me. Unfortunately, my ability to avoid trouble was less skilled. I probably wasn't the perfect friend for her. Today felt uncommonly cold. I was enduring it and hoping not to arrive at school for frostbitten. As usual between us, Anna had made the wiser choice. She was wrapped in scarves until there wasn't much visible except for her eyes and mouth, and I barely remembered my coat. "There's a pioneer meeting today," Anna said, through what looked like 18 layers of wool. "Are you going?" I groaned. We went to school to study letters and numbers, then stayed at school as members of the pioneers and learned why freedom was overrated, why individuality was bad, and why we must always avoid the evil influences of the West, such as fancy clothes and Beatles music. I loved the Beatles, but not even Anna knew about that. That secret was only for Fritz and me. He had bought me one of their albums, smuggled in through the black market, and he and I listened to it very low on nights when the streets were crowded and noisy. "Of course I'm going," I said. Not attending could bring my mother a visit from the school administrators, and none of us wanted that. Over the last 4 years, we'd already had too many questions from the school, the police, and even Stasi about my father. Nothing in East Germany frightened me more than the Stasi. We always knew they were there, even when we couldn't see them. They existed to protect our country from enemies, either foreign spies trying to get in or traitors who wanted to get out. My family wasn't either, but that didn't mean we were safe. After my father left, I had thought there'd be no need for them to visit anymore, but they obviously disagreed. They had last come almost 2 years ago, late at night, long after we would have been in bed. I think their timing was meant to make us nervous, and from the looks on my family's faces, it worked. Fritz and I had sat on either side of Mama on the couch while she answered their questions. I kept an eye on their weapons. If they'd only come to ask questions, why did they bring guns? The Stasi officer who had sat in Papa's old chair was on his second cigarette before the hard questions came. "Has Aldous Lowe returned to East Berlin?" I was sure I could hear Mama's heart pounding beside me. Or maybe it was mine because the officer's tone made it clear that he was no friend to my father. Mama shook her head, and if she was trying to answer in a calm voice, it didn't work. "I have not seen my husband since the wall went up." "Good," the officer said. "We will arrest him if he does return." He took a drag of his cigarette. "Does he continue to work against the government?" "He never did," Mama said. Another man who had stood by the door walked forward with photos that he placed in her hands. I leaned over just enough to see an old picture of my father and Herr Kraus, both with stacks of leaflets in their hands. I didn't know what was on them, but from the terse expression on the officer's face, it was obviously something more than party invitations or store coupons. Mama quickly handed the photos back. "I have no idea what my husband is doing now. He does not involve us in those activities, and he never did." He never involved Mama or me, but Fritz hadn't looked at the pictures, and I wondered if that was because he already knew what my father had been doing. "Has Aldous Lowe tried to contact you?" the officer asked. Mama shook her head, but when she paused for too long, I spoke for her. "We have no letters, and you can cut the phone lines to the west on the barbed wire Sunday." The officer turned his attention to me. His eyes were like ice on my bare skin. "I cut some of them myself, child. Does that anger you?" Of course it did, but he had the gun, so I only looked down, while Mama made humble apologies for my boldness and gripped my wrist like it was a vice. The Stasi left soon afterward, but even now, 2 years later, I still felt a chill whenever I thought of them. Since that night, Mama carefully made sure we did everything that might be expected of a good East German family. We waved our flags at the parades and smiled at the leaders of the GDR, German Democrat Republic, our communist government. Fritz joined the Free German Youth and made plans to enroll at the university one day. And at the beginning of every school year, I joined the pioneers. With Anna at my side, I participate in their meetings and activities, chanted the slogan to be ready, always ready, and wore the blue scarf and white shirt uniform on every holiday when it was required. If anyone was watching us, and we suspected they were, my family now looked as loyal as the best of them. Gerda, stop staring at the wall, Anna whispered to me. Do you think the soldiers don't notice? I think it's too cold for them to bother with me, I said. They watch the university students and the men whose families are on the other side. They don't watch 12-year-old girls on their way to school. Yes, they do, Anna insisted. Turn away, please. Look at anything else. At what? I gestured around me. There's nothing else to see. With all of this gray around us, it's hard to remember we live in a world of color. We called it communist gray. It was the color of our buildings, our markets, our streets. The color of the wall. Even the skies were gray today. Somehow the GDR must have figured out how to bleach that out too. But because I knew it bothered Anna, I stopped looking. And she and I fell into a conversation about the latest hair fashions. It was the sort of conversation two ordinary girls might have had on a perfectly ordinary day, even if one of those girls had her mind on something else entirely, as I almost always did. I became so distracted to my thoughts, in fact, that I barely noticed that when Anna stopped talking. I probably wouldn't have realized she had stopped walking either if she had not spoken my name. Gerda, look. I stopped and turned back at her. To my surprise, Anna stood facing the wall. Gerda, is that your brother? Several meters away, across the large scar of land that had become forbidden territory, a boy stood alone on a platform behind a wall in West Berlin. I usually tried to ignore the Westerners on the platforms because they made me feel like an exhibit at the zoo. I didn't want their looks of pity or sadness, or especially the occasional homesick expression, to return to this lesser half of the city. But the boy on the platform seemed to be staring directly at me, and I squinted to see him better. It had been 4 years since I had seen Dominic, and he would be 14 now. Mama kept a picture of him in the front room, and I mentally compared it with the boy now facing me. His face had lengthened and narrowed, but the hair, peeking out of his knitted cap, seemed about the right color. I would know him if I saw his eyes, but that was impossible from this distance. Still, there was something in his posture, that the way that he held one shoulder higher than the other. Dominic used to do that. I remember because my mother always reminded him to stand up straight. It had been a long time since my smile had stretched so wide. That's him, I said. That's my brother. He seemed to recognize me too, or at least he waved. I raised my hand back at him, although such a simple gesture was far too casual for the importance of this moment. For almost 4 years, neither of us had heard a word about the other, and all we could do now was wave in silence. Does something over there interest you? I turned to see a border guard standing right behind Anna and me, close enough that I could see the stitching of his black gloves. He was shorter than average, with white blonde hair shaved so close to his head that he almost looked bald. He was several years older than Fritz, but there were a lot of patches on his uniform, so I gathered he was more of a low-level officer. His name, stitched onto the uniform, was Mueller, and he stared down as if frightening me entertained him. Mueller had come up so quietly that neither of us heard him, but I should have known. Grenzers often patrolled this area, and of course my wave to Dominic would have caught one's attention. Besides me, Anna had turned to stone, or something like it. She wasn't moving, and possibly wasn't breathing either. Not me. I wanted to look up as far as his eyes, stare at him in the face, and tell him there was no crime in looking across the wall. More than anything, I wanted to show him I wasn't afraid. Except that I was. Mueller's rifle hung around his shoulder directly in front of me, and he had one hand on the stock. Maybe it was only my imagination, but I could have sworn that the rifle smelled like blood, and if he had used it on someone before. He lifted it over his head and moved his other hand to the trigger. I asked you a question, Mueller said. Who were you waving at? I turned back, but Dominic had disappeared by then, so I lowered my eyes and said to the officer, It was nobody, sir. You better remember that next time someone over there waves at you, He let the cold metal barrel brush against my cheek, and then ran it beneath my chin and pushed my head up to face him. Because those who get too curious about the other side sometimes get a taste of my bullets. Verches du. German. I stared into his icy blue eyes and tried not to let any hatred show in mine. Yes, I whispered, I understand exactly who you are. Then move along. Don't let me catch you stopping here again. I whispered another thanks to him, which almost immediately began to eat at my sense of justice. Then I grabbed Anna's arms. As terrified as I had been, she seemed worse. Her skin was deathly pale, and she leaned hard against me as we walked away. When Officer Mueller was out of sight, Anna released a gasp of air and then said to me, Promise you'll never stop there again. No matter who you see on the other side. Promise me, Gerda. Though her reddened eyes begged me to agree with her, I couldn't. Maybe I could promise to be more careful next time I stopped, but that was all. I didn't tell her that. She'd have launched into a fit of hysterics, which would have brought on Mueller's attention again. So I clutched her arm tighter as we continued to walk. My heart was pounding just as hers surely was, but for an entirely different reason. All I could think of was that after 4 long years, I'd finally seen my brother, and I hoped it wasn't for the last time. What do you think? Was it Dominic? We will find out. All right, guys, so that is the end of today's reading and words of the day. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. I am working on some teacher TikToks to put on here for your entertainment, and you may laugh at them if you want, but not laugh at me because I'm only trying here. But I hope you have a good day. And, you might see me later today. You never know. All right. Bye-bye.